Hi everyone. I follow the Law of Attraction group on Facebook, and recently they had a post which stopped me in my tracks. It said, "Hard lesson. Avoidance is just prolonged suffering disguised as safety." Now this really resonated with me because I totally recognize avoidance as a strategy that I've been using for a lot of my life, both in my personal and professional life as well. So I definitely use it, and I definitely recognize the prolonged suffering that comes from avoidance. So avoidance is basically the flight part of the fight or flight response, our brain's primitive response to danger or threat, which is, it's great if the thing that we're facing is a lion, but hopefully that's not happening in our everyday life. The truth is that avoidance, though, is not safety. It's not even neutral. It really is prolonged suffering, and that's what I want to explore in this video. Why we might use avoidance, how it shows up in our lives, what we get from it, and then hopefully a few things that if you do use this, you might want to try, that I found helpful in trying to release myself out of this particular pattern. So why do we use avoidance? Well, remember, it's about keeping us safe. And there's not a real lion anymore, but now there's a metaphorical one. So it's still one that's based on fear. So for example, we avoid a difficult conversation with a coworker because we have a fear of confrontation, or maybe we have a fear of that person no longer liking us if we have a strong people-pleasing aspect to ourselves. We might avoid taking the next step in business, even if we think we know what it is, because we might have a fear of failure or a fear of success, or even a fear of really difficult questions from people around us if things don't go exactly as they're planned. We might avoid paying bills in our everyday life, even if we have enough income to pay the bills. Depending on our attitude to money and our money mindset, we might avoid doing so even if we can afford to. And we might avoid, for example, going to a doctor because we're understandably afraid of what the potential diagnosis might mean. So all of these scenarios are based around fear, and I'll be really honest with you, I've been planning this video on avoidance for quite some time, and I've been avoiding recording it. When I sat down to try and understand that, I think I've had a fear about pressure putting on myself to try and maintain, a certain kind of quality or feel to the video. There's a diagram that I created that I want to put into the video, which may or may not happen. Now we'll have to see how it goes just now. And I think I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to try and get that diagram to exactly match what I wanted to say in the video. And the overall result is, of course, it's taken me weeks to record this video on avoidance. So I'm definitely still learning this lesson as we go. So how does avoidance show up? And does avoidance always look like avoidance? Well, sometimes we know for sure when we're avoiding something, don't we? We know when we have something to do and we are finding absolutely anything else that we can. We'll go and do the washing up, we'll go and clean all the mugs that we were quite happy to be dirty, paint walls if there's a task that we really, really don't want to do. Sometimes we only notice that we're avoiding something if we can get really conscious about that item on a to-do list that keeps tracking from one week to the next but never moves above the bottom of the to-do list. You can see that we're perhaps subconsciously deprioritizing it. Sometimes avoidance shows up as indecision or confusion, which are both strategies that I know I've used in the past in order to try and to prevent myself from having to take the next step about something if for whatever reason I don't feel confident about it. Sometimes avoidance can be disguised as really, really rational thinking and sound logic. For example, we shouldn't buy a house right now because we're not financially secure, and things like that. It's not the right time. There are many other reasons, and it all sounds like a really robust argument. But if you strip it back, it might be that there's still an underlying fear, really, that all this logical, sound, rational reasoning is covering up. And sometimes avoidance might show up as things that feel really important, like if we want to post frequently on social media, but we might spend a long time perfecting one piece of content and going back to it. And every time we go back to it, we go back to it a different perspective. So we want to change something, make something slightly different. And of course, we now have the most perfect piece of content never published. And we've been using avoidance that whole time, but we thought it felt really, really important and necessary thing to do. So understand why we might use avoidance and how it shows up, but what do we really, really get when we employ this coping strategy? Well, as we heard at the beginning, one of the things we definitely get is prolonged suffering. And I'll come on to that, but I just want to focus for a moment on what it feels like when we finally do those things that we've been avoiding. Remember, we were avoiding them at the start because they felt painful. That conversation with a coworker. But what might end up happening after a long period where we don't address these issues is that eventually one day absolutely flip. There's the last straw and it sparks a huge confrontation. The very thing that we might have been worried and wanting to avoid. If you think about the bills that we've been avoiding paying, they might now be piling up. We might reach to the point where there's that risk of utilities being cut off, or serious implications for mortgages and houses being repossessed. These are all big consequences that we were worried about, that perhaps by using this tactic we might actually be starting to potentially create a reality for. And as we all know, the longer we leave things that we're worried about undiagnosed and unexplored, then there's the potential for, when it comes to it, for a diagnosis or a treatment to be more complex and to be more serious. So we got to the point where we finally done the thing that we were worried about doing because the pain of not doing it became greater than the pain of doing it. Okay, the worry about not doing it became greater than the worry of doing it. So already we've got an increased level of pain that we're experiencing now that we're finally getting around to it. But the prolonged suffering is an additional factor that we've brought along for the ride. Because during that whole period of avoidance, it also wasn't neutral. Chances are you didn't say, I'm avoiding doing this thing because I'm really worried, so I'm going to put it over there in the don't do it for 3 months box, and then that whole time I'm not going to think about it. No. Chances are, if you're like me, you probably ruminated over it. Probably cause increasing anxiety. It might even lead to things like, a reduced self-trust, because now you feel like you're building up evidence of the fact that even when you know what the next step is, you're not taking it. Therefore, you can't trust yourself either to have good ideas that are action worthy or to take action. And all of these things can lead to even an erosion of self-confidence. So even if none of those things the things we were worried about came to fruition, here's hoping. Here's hoping that it's fine with paying the bills and it's fine with going to the doctor, and all of those things are fine. But we still had all these feelings and suffering that we've still experienced during this period of avoidance. But you're worth so much more and you deserve so much better than to be putting yourself through this. So, how can we try to make things a little bit easier on ourselves? Well, for me, what I found helpful is first of all to investigate and reflect and try to identify if avoidance is something that I use, but when do I use it? In what circumstances? How does it show up? And get really honest with myself, while at the same time being kind as well. Remember, this is simply our brain trying to keep us safe. Okay? I also try to get objective about the fear that I have, and I found Tim Ferriss's fear setting exercise to be incredibly helpful, just to give me that perspective on the things that I think that I'm worried about, and I realize that actually they'll almost always have a solution that I can reach to. The other thing is then to ask yourself, do you actually want things to be different? Because if you want things to be different, spoiler alert, you're going to have to be different. You're going to have to find a way to think about things differently and then to take different action which disrupts this avoidance pattern. These are all conscious questions that require conscious answers. And then finally, I find it really helpful to identify the next step, not the next 100 steps, not all the steps, just the next step, and take it. For me, I find that the longer I take to take a step and the more I use avoidance, the more likely I will end up not ever doing that thing. So action, really swift action, after you've had an idea or after you've received something that you need to do, I've found really, really helpful to being able to disrupt that pattern of avoidance. So just to sum up, if you use avoidance, it's okay, it's normal, it's all part of trying to keep yourself safe. But realize that that safety that we have, it might be a false sense of safety. Certainly, we might be getting a lot of suffering along the way. You might be eroding your own sort of self-confidence and self-trust, and you deserve so much better than that. And maybe it's really not that safe to play things small. Good luck. Be kind to yourself. Take care.